Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 4.16, the Second Red Scare. It includes information that goes along with the third section on your Unit 4 study guide. Now remember, you have control over the lecture. Make sure you're using your study guide when you're taking the notes. Write down any questions you have and pause or rewatch it when you need to. Let's go ahead and get started. We spent some time looking at and learning about the politics and foreign actions of the U.S. during the early Cold War, from Truman through Kennedy. Now I want to take some time to examine what was happening in American society and life during the period, much of which is actually tied to our foreign relationships. Not only was America as a country fearful of communism and the spread of communism, American citizens were fearful of the same thing. People were worried that communism could spread into America, undermining the country, the government, and destroying our way of life. That fear is called the Red Scare. Communism is associated with being red. The communist army that first overthrew the Tsar was the Red Army. The Soviet's flag is red. And so this is where the whole idea of red and Red Scare comes from. Americans were afraid of communism and communists. That's what it means. This fear impacted everyday life for many people. People were trying to find communists in their neighborhoods, and communists must act differently than others, right? So anyone who acted different must be a communist. This was the thinking at the time. This led Americans to conform to a strict set of social rules or norms in order to not be suspected of being a communist. So you wanted to be like everyone else. People were so influenced by those feelings that the U.S. House of Representatives created a committee called the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, to investigate suspected communists in the U.S. It was created in 1938 after the first Red Scare in the 20s, if you remember learning about that, in order to keep America safe and stop communism from expanding within the U.S. So while most of their actions were unremarkable and we don't usually talk about them, in 1947, this group made an enormous impact on popular culture. In that year, the HUAC called many different Hollywood actors, directors, writers, all to testify before them. Essentially, the men were being asked to swear that they were loyal to the United States. There was no evidence that they were not loyal. They had just they had been involved in the making of a film, perhaps, that made people suspect, well, that wasn't 100% American. So they were called and told to testify. Most of them made the oath, took it, no problem. However, 10 of them felt like their rights were being violated by this, and they refused to testify. They invoked their right to remain silent, which is Amendment 5. This group became known as the Hollywood 10. They were all actually sentenced to prison for contempt of Congress. Now remember, they weren't on trial for breaking a law, they were just called to testify before Congress, but they ended up going to prison. Then all 10 ended up being blacklisted from Hollywood, which means no studio would hire them. It also brought attention to communism in the media, so big deal. This attention continued to grow, and in 1951, Senator Joseph McCarthy brought it to its peak. This is kind of the mass hysteria part of the Red Scare. So while he was giving his speech, Senator McCarthy held up a list of names that he claimed were 205 communists currently working for the U.S. State Department. I mean, they're working for our government, they're making policy, they have secrets that they're available to them. So he urged Americans to stop the communists from taking over the U.S. government and to act. The hunt for communists that followed became known as McCarthyism. So they were literally hunting communists. It took the Red Scare to a new level. It asked people to report those they thought were communists, to turn in their neighbors if they suspected them of wanting to destroy the U.S. Under McCarthyism, suspicion equaled guilt, and guilt brought severe consequences. And essentially anyone who was different, whether it was dress, religion, beliefs, mannerisms, belongings, whatever, they were a suspect, which meant they were guilty. Ultimately, Senator McCarthy went too far and lost his influence. He started attacking and accusing well-known figures like George Marshall, the guy who came up with the Marshall Plan we learned about, and the U.S. military and military leaders. He said they were communist. Once the more ridiculous accusations were made, the Senate actually started investigating all of McCarthy's claims. Turned out, he'd made everything up. His list of 205 names from the State Department completely fabricated. He did it all to promote himself and to win re-election. So by 1954, even his most loyal followers had abandoned him, and as it came out that McCarthy had been lying all along. And that is the end of U.S. Notes 4.16. I'll see you in class with any questions you have.